Please be seated. Since we started the Cornerstone service about 2.5 years ago, almost every Sunday, about midway back over on this side, right on the aisle, a sweet, one of our elderly saints, Pat Nur, sat there. She couldn't come forward for the communion, so we would take it out to her each week. Pat has now entered into the joy of her Father's kingdom. The service will be tomorrow at 3 o'clock here in the sanctuary. We invite you to be in prayer for the members of her family. 6 children, 15 grandchildren, 13 great-grandchildren. A wonderful legacy of faith. So we're finishing up this day our series of looking through some of the stories of Jesus in this gospel time. And we come to a peculiar story today. It is from Matthew 22, the parable of the wedding banquet. Listen to what Jesus says. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, and he said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted calf have been butchered. Everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find.' So the servants went out into the streets, gathered all the people that they could find, the bad as well as the good. The wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guest, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked, 'How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?' The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, 'Tie him hand and foot, throw him outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen.'" The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. It's probably one of the strangest social evenings we've ever had, when the pastor of a rather large and prestigious church invited us to come to his home in River Oaks for a special little dinner party many years ago. We were excited about it. I was surprised that the big steeple guy even knew who we were. So we promptly cleared the day on our calendars. We arranged for a sitter for our young children. When the evening came, we proudly drove across town in our old car with a green bean casserole in the floorboard, our contribution to the meal. We went to the address we had been told was the house. Only when we arrived, there was nobody else there. We checked the time on the invitation, and sure enough, it was correct. It was the right day. It was the right time. But there were no other cars. We shone the headlights on the curb to make sure we had the right house number, and yeah, we did. But not only was the porch light not on, there were not many other houses, lights in the house on either. So we drove around for a while. You know that drill. We came back. Still no party. We parked across the street and began our stakeout of the house. Nobody came. Those green beans began to sort of slosh around a bit in the floorboard. Until at last we saw a light in the kitchen come on, and the pastor, we could see him come to the sink. But he obviously wasn't dressed for a dinner party. Within a few minutes, the lights went back out, and he was gone. So finally we left. We tossed the green bean casserole in a dumpster, went to Jack in the Box for dinner. A few days later we found out that the pastor of the church was sick, and so the dinner party had been moved to somewhere else, only nobody told us about it. I gotta admit, we not only felt silly, we felt left out. But we would have felt worse had we not been the guest of the party that moved without telling us, but the host of that party. See, nobody likes to be embarrassed. It's hard to go to the effort to toss a party, to decorate, to send out invitations, to make out place cards, to go get the big bag of Doritos. And yet when the hour comes, still you find yourself somehow all alone in a party with no guest. So maybe that's why Jesus told this parable, because after having cleared the temple in Jerusalem just a few days earlier, and then being challenged as to his authority both by the Sadducees, who ran the temple, and the Pharisees, who controlled the synagogues, as the days of his final week on this earth wore on, I think Jesus knew what it was to be rejected by other people. Now, we should mention there is a rather similar version of this story that shows up in Luke's Gospel in chapter 14, and many have concluded it's the same story, only it has some different details. You can see that we're not told that it is a king who has the party in Luke, for instance, just a certain man. Luke doesn't specify it's a wedding banquet, just a big dinner. The good doctor doesn't mention at all that uncomfortable part about the folks killing the servants, and then the king sending in troops to burn down the city, presumably where the party was supposed to have been held. Leads me to think that Jesus may have used the same theme out of giving a feast, but that he had a different truth that he wanted to emphasize in this. The details don't actually matter here. What is clear, though, is that everybody who heard this story would have been able to relate to it in some way, because everybody knew what it was like to be invited to such a festivity. Not just once, but as, according to the Jewish custom, was twice. The first time in a general save-the-date kind of way. Come on over, Sunday, we're having that Jesus guy here. The second, by a personal summons. The meal is ready, come immediately. The rabbis had long said, in fact, that nobody would even dream of going to such a meal unless they had been invited twice. Just imagine, said Jesus, how you might feel if you were the host. And one by one, the people who had told you yes began to bug out on you. They had excuses. Two of them were business people, important people. First was a buyer and seller of land. He just closed on a great deal. He wanted to go look at the land some more. Second was a fellow who the other version of this story tells us, had bought some cattle for his land. He had a lot of horse trading he wanted to finish up. And in the Lukean account, there's a third excuse given of a man who had just gotten married, and he was still in that honeymoon kind of mindset. Probably wasn't Amish, but that's close enough. By the law of Moses, when a fellow got hitched, he was excused from going to war for a full year. And you've been to social engagements, haven't you, that felt like war? So all the guests, at least those the Gospels tell us about, had a reason for not coming. Now we can point out that the man who was getting married should have known he was getting married, and could have planned ahead a little bit. The two business people could have arranged their affairs slightly differently had they wanted to. So in the end, these were just excuses thus, not too terribly different from the three things Jesus once told us choked out the good word in the parable of the sower in Luke 8, the cares of the world, the deceitfulness of riches, the pleasures of life. However you explained it, what it meant in the end was that the host of that dinner, Jesus said, was left stuck with a whole lot of fajitas to eat by himself. So he did something kind of radical. After being rejected by his original guests, the king sent his servants out to invite not the rich, not the powerful, not the bold, not the beautiful, not the open-coming socially, but anybody they could find, both good and bad, verse 10 tells us. It didn't matter to the king. Compelle entrare. Compel them to come in, he said. So that's what the servants did. The wedding hall was full. Only when the king came in to see his gifts, he noticed there was one man in the banquet who was not wearing the proper wedding clothes for the evening. At this point, it seems odd to us because we think, well, if the gifts had just been dragged off the street, of course that they wouldn't have proper kinds of wedding attire. The women didn't even have time to go home and put their fascinators in their hair. So how did the king get mad at this guy who wasn't wearing proper dress? See, let's be clear, the king was mad. He called him friend, but that word is only used in the gospel two other places. Once in the parable of the owner of the vineyard and the workers, and the worker who complains to him, and the owner says, "Friend, did I not pay you what I said I was going to pay you?" And the other time Jesus uses it when Judas betrays him, and Jesus says to Judas, "Friend, go what you have come to do." So the king says, "Friend, how'd you get in here without wedding clothes?" And the man must have known it was wrong because he was speechless. The great saint of the early ages, Augustine, used to say that the king must have supplied all of the appropriate wedding gifts, clothes to his gifts, sort of a first century men's warehouse deal going on. But this guy simply chose not to wear the clothing. Maybe that's the case. The parable doesn't tell us. Maybe this particular man was someone who ought to have known better and could have dressed up a bit more, but he simply chose not to do so out of his lack of respect for the king's position. Maybe it's all metaphor at this point. Who knows? But in the end, that doesn't matter much either. See, I rather suspect in relating this parable to this story to his listeners, Jesus wanted them to understand two rather simple yet seemingly paradoxical truths. First, that God's grace is for all, but not everybody's going to receive it. That is to say, as the story which Jesus makes clear, the coming kingdom of God, represented by a great banquet, will be made up not just of the ones whom we might expect to be there, but also the people whom you and I sometimes simply forget about. The poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame. Those who have been disabled in and by life. See, it is the marginalized in our society whom the Master specifically calls to be invited to his table. We may not even see such folks. Or if we do, we might look right past them. But I'm here to tell you, to such belongs the kingdom of heaven. Philip Doley, an Indiana Quaker, tells of a man named Ray, whom he says became a friend of his father when his dad served on the town board where they lived, and Ray worked for the sewer department. Ray was one of those eminently useful kinds of men whom it pays to know if you need something done, from getting a raccoon out of your attic to sniffing out the most likely spots for some mushrooms, to setting off the town fireworks on the 4th of July. In a specialist world, Ray was a generalist. He started working for the town when he graduated from high school. College was out of the question. It cost him money, and Ray's family not having any. So instead, he married his high school sweetheart. They settled into a small house outside of town. They slipped into the lifestyle from which Ray himself had come. You work hard, you raise your kids, you hope they turn out all right, you pray to Jesus that Social Security will be there when you retire. Ray and his wife had a daughter who became his pride and joy. She made straight A's, even out-hustled the doctor's kid in town to become the valedictorian of her class. But the halls of Harvard don't exactly overflow with sewer workers' children. So as it had been for her father, college seemed out of reach for her. Till that is, a school in Ohio looking for some smart kids offered her a free education. Her dream of becoming a psychologist drew closer. She went to Ohio, and Ray began to borrow Dolly's father's car once a month to go visit his daughter. Fiercely proud of her. A lot of people still never thought much of Ray, him being the sewage worker for the town. Philip Dolly says that he knows in 10 years Ray's daughter will be charging a doctor's kid $200 a session to help him get his head on straight. He'll moan about how his parents expected too much, and she'll tell him in a therapeutic way with appropriate sensitivity to grow up and get a life. And the next time she sees her parents, she'll hug them. She'll say, "Thanks for believing in me." Go quickly into the streets and into the alleys, Luke says, the highways and hedges. Bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame. So the master of the banquet told his servants, because you see, God's care really is for everybody. But on the other hand, not everybody will receive it. Not because he doesn't want them to, but because some may choose simply to put themselves out of his circle. The gospel excludes none who don't exclude themselves, but it does exclude them. Which means that despite what some may want to say, not everybody goes to heaven. But who would knowingly exclude themselves from God's grace, you see? The same kind of folks who made excuses for not showing up at the supper party of the king in this story. Folks are either too busy or distracted by the things of life to recognize the gift of life. And you and I, we all know such people, don't we? In fact, sometimes we are such people, aren't we? You see, just in case you've not realized it, just being on a church membership roll will mean absolutely nothing when we stand before God one day. He won't say, "Oh, you're a member of Christ Church. Of course, come on in." What he will ask us is, did you come to the table when I invited you? Because it really is for everybody. Black, brown, African, Indian, Pakistani, Chinese, Mexican, El Salvadoran, MI6 or MS-13. American-born are those with no country to call home. It's for everybody. Everybody except those who would rather go to hell than to share God's grace with other people. God's grace is for all, but not everybody will receive it. Words that needed to be said yesterday in Virginia for those on both sides of those yelling masses of people. See, in the end, God will be glorified. Here's the other truth of this story. God's house will be full, but there will always be room for one more. We can fuss and we can fume, we can throw a fit, we can take off in the opposite direction, run like Jonah did, but we can't frustrate the will of God. Even if the voices of men are still, God will make the rocks themselves cry out. So one way or another, God's house will be full. But if we turn to him, the good news is, there will still be room even for you and for me. That's why the imagery of the table is so significant here, I think. Even after it's been said, you can still squeeze somebody in, can't you? You can take the chairs out, put a piano bench in, put all the kids on that. You can take the centerpiece off, put another plate down. You can bring that folding card table, put it on the end, make the tablecloth kind of stretch over it like it was all one table, even though somebody's sitting like this. There's always room. I grew up with, 30-something cousins. I don't even know how many. My wife had mom had 5 sisters, and it was just a little crazy. When we had family dinners, I was at the kids' table, which was better because it was closer to the buffet table that had all the desserts. But the sisters were all at the table, and all 5 of them, 6 of them were all talking at the same time. All of them at the same time, and they all understood each other. I don't understand it. The brothers-in-law were all kind of waiting to go back in the other room and watch the football game on TV. And the cousins all wanted to go back outside and to play as soon as we could. But I loved being at the table because I was reminded I was part of a family. a big, wild, usually dysfunctional family. But a family. That's why Jesus talked about the kingdom of heaven as a supper table. This morning I'm here to tell you that many have indeed been called. Everybody has been. But few have been chosen. Not because God is choosy, but because relatively few will accept the invitation that comes to us from on high. You don't have to understand it all. Nobody understands it all. You don't have to get all the particulars of this parable. You don't have to. You just have to say yes to the invitation God has for you. Now, maybe you did that years ago at a camp meeting or at a revival or in the quietness of your own prayers, but as the years have gone by, you've forgotten that one day, sooner rather than later, God is going to call you a second time and say, now it's time, come on. Maybe you've never had that experience. This morning, you'd like to put that right. And maybe you're like a lot of Methodists, just kind of oozed into the faith without ever really embracing it personally. The Savior is waiting to enter your heart. See, my friends, I'm here to tell you that at the table of the Lord, there is healing and there is grace. At the table of the Lord, there is love and there is forgiveness. At the table of the Lord, as at the foot of the cross, all men and all women are equal, everybody. At the table of the Lord, we're all children of the one Father. We're all sitting at the kids' table. At the table of the Lord, there is plenty. And all have been invited. There's room, even for you, even for me. Let's put on our wedding clothes and go to the party. Amen.
Indeed, it is at the table where all things are made right. I am so struck by the message today.